Hey guys, Youngblood with you, and today we're going to go ahead and cover the Q&A that was released the other day for the Anvil Ballista missile platform. Now, if you haven't really played around with the vehicle, it is in PTU, everybody has access to it, so I would highly suggest at least getting into PTU and playing with it because it is kind of a unique vehicle to have in the game, and frankly, it's kind of a lot of fun too. So running through some of these questions, the first one is, will the Ballista be able to lock on and have a firing arc to be able to hit ground targets and get over hills? And they say right now, no. The vehicle is going to basically require a direct line of sight, as well as having a sufficient signature to be able to get the job done. Now, in the future, what they're saying is that someone else is going to be able to use their ship, or maybe even like a targeting laser or something like that, to be able to transmit the targeting data to your ship. Being the Ballista, to be able to lock from a significantly further range. So that's kind of interesting and attractive. If you've used this in kind of a hilly region, PXP did this for a little operation last night, for example, and the missiles do have a hard time with tracking, and they do tend to kind of hit hills if there's things in their line of sight. So I think there's going to be potentially needed changes to the flight models of the missiles to be able to really kind of do like arcing strikes on targets on the other side of hills, but we'll see where that ends up going. One of the standard questions that we almost always see is there going to be any planned modularity, like swapping out the back for medical exploration or cargo, which I kind of get. You know, it's a ground vehicle, it's a bigger vehicle, it's kind of a nice looking vehicle. It almost looks, like like it could almost be like a tractor trailer, for example. But no, they like the suggestions, but as of right now, it's very planned on being the specific vehicle that we have now with the missile platform on the back. A question came up about how will restocking work. Does it need to get back to an outpost or a landing pad to rearm? And they say as of right now, yes, and that is the case for where things are today. It needs to get to an outpost, get the little wrench icon, and then you can sit there and do like rearming and repairing and refueling. Later on, though, there are going to be ships like the Vulcan that can do the job. Now, one thing to really keep in mind here is that missiles on this thing are big, and we haven't really seen the Vulcan fleshed out to a point to really get a good understanding of how much cargo space and what it all really looks like. So technically, yes, the Vulcan could do the job. Is the Vulcan capable of carrying size 7 missiles in the back to be able to rearm a Ballista? We're not really sure. Now, the Scorpions that are on top, that's going to be small ammo. It should be relatively easy to do, but there's just a little bit of to be determined there in regards to how realistic it is to do a field rearm when you start talking about big missiles. Someone went on to basically say that a range of 2,000 meters feels very short for an AA platform. In all actuality, the effective range currently on fighters is about 10,000 meters. It was printed wrong in the jump point. If you've actually used this, it does acquire locks at a pretty significant range. Now, much like in dogfighting, launching a missile from an extreme distance isn't always a good option because you're obviously giving your target substantial time to be able to react and move and do different things. That being said, everything is signature based. The example they gave was they shot a fighter down at 9,984 meters, which is just a hair under that 10,000 meter range. That being said, with it all being signature related, if you bring in something like a Retaliator or a Reclaimer or something large like that, you should technically be able to launch or lock on from a much further range. Again, is that the best practice? I don't know. Probably not. Now, something like a bigger ship is going to have a harder time moving in atmosphere and avoiding the damage anyway, so it may not end up being an issue at all. Another standard question, what can actually transport the Ballista? And then also a slightly less common question could you use something like an Argo to be able to cable lift it, which is an interesting option. I think we've seen on the Ursa that it's got what almost looks like grommets on top to where you could kind of clip cables. Now, that's hasn't been stated by CIG as in the plan, so I don't want anybody to get carried away there, but there's some hints at it, at least in some designs elsewhere, where that could theoretically be possible. As far as the Ballista, there's only 2 ships that have really been designed to transport it so far, those being the Hercules and the Idris, which means that they could be put in and secured with all the doors closed and basically everything's all copacetic. They go on to say that the 890 is big enough to carry it, though it's not necessarily designed to. What that actually means, I'm not sure. They'd say that it's not necessarily securing it, so maybe it rattles around. Maybe if you take damage, it rolls over. We'll have to see. It may have something to do with the pad itself and whether it's capable of locking down a vehicle of that size, but we'll see. They do also say the tractor beams could move it, if it's a sufficient size tractor beam, though it's going to be far less secure. The only thing that I can really think of that may be able to do this would be like the Caterpillar, for example, where they have that whole tractor station. I have a hard time envisioning that something like the 315 is going to have a capable enough tractor beam to drag this vehicle along that's basically the same size of the ship. So I think there's some hope there for those that are wanting to use a tractor beam, but I would say just be a little bit cautious in what your expectations are. Another error was brought up in the documentation. It stated that there's an optional size 2 turret on the Ballista, and basically we were wondering if there's another one other than the existing turret that's on there, and the answer was no. You do have the size 2 Scorpions on the front turret, and you get the missiles on the back. There's not a third missile solution or a third weapon system on there. Somebody went on to ask how modular the missile rack is. Could we have 16 size 5 missiles or 4 size 7s, like those types of things, basically like we see on the missile mount modularity that we have. They say that there's not any plans to allow this right now because everything on the Ballista is very bespoke to this vehicle, which makes, kind of sense. You're not necessarily just dealing with a hard point to where you're mounting a missile rack. This is actually part of that turret that's located on the back. So I wasn't really expecting this to be anything other than a no, but it is good to hear it confirmed. That being said, for the purpose of this vehicle, I do like the fact that it has the 5s and 7s, because you need to be able to do a lot of damage on these first initial shots because you're not always going to be getting through the shields, because you don't have, laser weapons, and the Scorpions on top have a limited range. You need to really maximize the damage that you do. That being said, the bigger the missile, the bigger the cost, so it can become an expensive platform to run, though if you're going to fire a missile, you want to do the damage, it may be worth the cost anyways. Somebody asked a very long question about how CIG plans to balance the air versus the ground game, kind of like how different types of spaceships fare better against others. Light fighters tend to be harder for, heavy fighters to actually hit, but heavy fighters can deal with better, damage, and they have like a larger health pool. How does that all balance out? And they said that it's a good question and it needs more time than they're basically willing to spend in the Q&A. But they plan to have a follow-up discussion on this at some point. I think that's a good topic for something like an Around the Verse, or maybe one of the Friday calls. So we'll just see what comes out of that. Because, frankly, I think this just goes back to everything that's related to missiles. Because I say this every time we start talking about the Freelancer Mist, for example. Even though that got bolstered up and has better weaponry on it now, anything that's very reliant on missiles and torpedoes is very reliant on how they end up balancing out missiles versus countermeasures versus speed. Because it does seem like we get a patch and missiles are terrible, and then we get the next patch and missiles are God mode, and then it bounces back and forth. So there's a lot here that's very dependent on where this balance ends, and we need to see where that goes. Question about the skins. Basically, are you going to be able to buy other skins? For example, if you have the Snowblind, we'd be able to buy the Dune. They say that the skins are really unique to the SKUs of the Warbond vehicles, so they're not going to be offered for purchase later. I'm personally okay with that, just because I know we've got vehicle customization coming later, so while the skins are a unique and easy way to actually get a kind of a cool look on your vehicle, we'll have customization that we can do later too. Are there plans to allow for the gunner's seat to be able to use the turret? For example, is a person in the back that's targeting with missiles, is there plans to allow them to actually use the remote turret up front? I kind of wish this answer was yes, but unfortunately it's a no. They say that the gunner seat is really only for the missile launcher. The driver is going to be the one that can use that turret. They don't need to lock down to do it, so you could technically drive and switch over to remote turret mode pretty quickly. That being said, you may still be drifting a little bit, you might run into stuff, you may also not be able to maneuver your vehicle while you're in that mode, so you kind of are a sitting duck. You're either driving and unable to hit anything, or you end up in a scenario where you're stationary and you can shoot, but you're obviously an easy target yourself. So it's not a real ideal scenario, which tends to mean that this ship is one that's going to require some support around it, depending on how many threats are coming in. It says that you can use the missiles to artillery strike ground targets. The question came up, can you free fire, or will you be able to, or be required to make a lock? Basically, are you able to just point your reticle at a ground vehicle and just fire and basically go dumb fire mode to where the lock isn't happening? And they say that there's a requirement for missiles in general that there's a lock. And that doesn't really plan to change right now, though they may implement some smart ordnance in the future that would allow for this. I think the key difference here in what we're looking at is that dumbfire ability is a rocket mechanic. It's not a missile mechanic. So unless you're able to mount a rocket launcher onto this, you're not going to have a whole lot of luck in being able to do free fire. Now, maybe there's possibility down the road to where you could put a small rocket launcher on the turret as opposed to the Scorpions. They haven't mentioned that, so I'm not holding my breath that that's going to happen. But if the overall modularity of hardpoints stays the same, that may end up being a possibility. A question was brought up about, can you use the Ballista missiles to intercept other missiles in the future, like size 9 torpedoes or the A2 bombs? And they say that functionality in general is something that they're really saying is critical to be able to be implemented for just larger ship sustainability. You know, if you're in a Javelin or an Idris or something and size 9s are coming in, you want to be able to target those and take those out if you can see them. That being said, I'm assuming targeting a missile or a torpedo, something that's moving very quickly, is going to be hard to do. You probably need to pick up that lock from a long range out. You probably also need to be ready to fire. It also takes a long time for some missiles to lock. So you may have a hard time doing this, though they're saying that the functionality should be there. They also say that you probably need the right missile to do the job. I kind of equate this to being like... most missiles are going to have a heat signature, so you probably want to use like an IR type missile for this as opposed to like a cross section, because missiles are going to have a very small cross section signature, so it would be hard to pick up and actually track. You also probably don't want to use something like a Rattler, for example, that you fire off, it then breaks, and then you get a bunch of small missiles instead. Now, if it's a slow enough incoming target, you may be able to do that, and that may end up working better, but that extra stage to where the time takes, it may cause some problems down the road. So we'll probably get more information on that. Once we start getting this ability, I'll test it and get back to you guys. And the last question is kind of a funny one. Can you fire missiles while locked down inside another ship, like the Starlifter hangar? And they said, yes, you can, although obviously it may be dangerous to fire these from inside the hangar of another ship. If you've seen the way these missiles fire, they tend to kind of come off at funny angles, and most hangars are not cavernous, so you're not necessarily going to have a lot of room there to be able to get that off. The better scenario would be launching from something like a landing pad on a Kraken, and then you're obviously not having to worry about a hangar above you. That being said, if the other target is moving fast, you're on the Kraken that's moving fast, getting locks may be challenging, and then who knows, maybe you fire and the ship ends up drifting into it and you hit your own ship. So there's probably some coordination there that's required to make that actually work. So overall, those are your Q&A questions for the Anvil Ballista. Still a very cool little vehicle. It's been fun to play with, so I'm glad that this thing's in the game. How it all ends up being balanced down the road, we will see. If you have questions, let me know. Otherwise, stay tuned for more. Have yourselves a wonderful day, and take care.